What if the stories we call history were just the most successful lies ever told? They say the word history comes from his story, meaning it never had to be true, just believable. Some people had the imagination to write fiction so powerful, the world mistook it for fact. Today, we're exposing 24 lies people still believe are true. Lie number 1. The Great Wall of China. The Great Wall of China, the only man-made object visible from the moon. They told us it's the monument so vast you could see it from the moon. But here's the truth. You can't. Not from the moon. Not even reliably from orbit. Astronauts have tried, and they say you're more likely to spot a highway than the Great Wall itself. It's 20 feet wide, built from stone and soil that blends into the land. The myth started centuries before space travel, a perfect mix of pride and poetic exaggeration. Because visible from the moon sounded too good to fact-check, and we wanted it to be true. Still, we believed it because it sounded legendary. A beautiful lie is harder to erase than an ugly truth. Lie number 2. Disney's lemming suicide. In 1958, Disney released a nature documentary that shocked the world. It showed hordes of lemmings hurling themselves off a cliff into icy water. Proof, they said, of an instinct to self-destruct. The truth? It was staged. The filmmakers bought the animals, flew them to a cliff, and pushed them off so the cameras could roll. The mass suicide that became a global metaphor for blind conformity was actually a movie scene. A lie so cruel, it won an Oscar. Lie number 3. The Illuminati myth. They say the Illuminati controls everything. Wars, presidents, even the music you listen to. Secret handshakes, hidden symbols, and the all-seeing eye on the dollar bill. But the real Illuminati? It was a small Bavarian philosophy club founded in 1776. A group of nerdy scholars arguing about reason and science. They lasted barely 10 years before being shut down. The global conspiracy? That came centuries later, built from fear, fiction, and the human need to blame shadows when the truth feels too ordinary. Lie number 4. St. Patrick and the Fallen Snakes. Every March, we hear the story. St. Patrick, the man who drove all the snakes out of Ireland. It's a miracle repeated in songs, parades, and classrooms. But here's the truth. There were never any snakes in post-Ice Age Ireland. The island was surrounded by water long before they could ever slither there. The snakes were a symbol. They represented the old pagan beliefs Patrick worked to replace with Christianity. He didn't fight reptiles. He fought ideas. And sometimes, rewriting nature makes a better story than rewriting faith. Lie number 5. Absinthe, the green fairy myth. For over a century, absinthe was banned and feared, called the green fairy, blamed for madness, hallucinations, and crime. Artists and poets swore it opened their minds. Governments swore it destroyed them. But the truth? It was never dangerous. The myth came from a smear campaign by the French wine industry, desperate to win back sales. Absinthe contains a tiny chemical called Trojan, but you'd die of alcohol poisoning long before it ever altered your mind. The painters weren't having visions, they were just drunk. And a rumor turned into a century-long ghost story. Lie number 6. Diamonds are rare, the De Beers lie. We've been told diamonds are rare, the ultimate symbol of love, value, and forever. But that was never true. In the early 1900s, one company, De Beers, quietly bought every major mine and hoarded the supply. Then they launched a single slogan that changed the world. A diamond is forever. The words didn't describe reality. They created it. Overnight, engagement rings became tradition, prices skyrocketed, and a common mineral turned into a global illusion. Diamonds aren't rare. Marketing just made them sacred. Lie number 7. The Dark Ages believed the Earth was flat. We've all heard it, that people in the Middle Ages thought the Earth was flat, and Columbus risked sailing off the edge. It's one of the most persistent historical lies ever told. The truth? Educated people in the Middle Ages already knew the Earth was round. Scholars had been reading Greek texts from Aristotle and Ptolemy for centuries. The real argument wasn't about shape. It was about size. Columbus wasn't proving the world was round. He was just bad at math. The flat Earth myth was invented centuries later to make the past look stupid and the explorers look heroic. It wasn't ignorance that built that lie. It was storytelling. But still, we see a lot of people in YouTube argue that Earth is flat, even after all scientific discoveries and space travel. Lie number 8. Newton and the apple myth. We all know the story. Isaac Newton sits under a tree, an apple falls on his head, and boom, gravity is born. It's the perfect origin story for genius. Simple, visual, and easy to remember. But it never happened that way. Newton later said he saw an apple fall while looking out a window. It didn't hit him at all. That quiet moment simply made him wonder why things always fall straight down, not sideways or up. The idea of the bonk on the head was added years later to make the story more dramatic. Genius doesn't always arrive with impact. Sometimes it's just observation. Lie number 9. The unsinkable Titanic. The ship that even God couldn't sink. That line has echoed for over a century, the Titanic's most haunting claim. But here's the truth. The company behind it never said that. The White Star Line called the Titanic practically unsinkable. It was journalists who dropped the practically to make a better headline. Unsinkable ship sinks. That sells papers. The company used lawyer-safe marketing. The media turned it into divine irony. Sometimes the disaster isn't the event itself. It's how the story gets told. Lie number 10. Cleopatra's beauty myth. History remembers Cleopatra as the world's most beautiful woman, a queen who conquered empires with her looks. But that version of her was written by her enemies. Cleopatra wasn't even Egyptian. She was Greek, the last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty. Ancient coins show her with a hooked nose, sharp chin, and high forehead, not the goddess Hollywood imagined. Her real power wasn't beauty. It was intelligence, charm, and strategy. She spoke 9 languages, negotiated with empires, and bent history to her will. Cleopatra didn't seduce with her face. She seduced with her mind. Lie number 11. The Iron Maiden, the torture device that never existed. You've seen it in movies and museums. A human-sized iron coffin lined with spikes inside. The Iron Maiden, medieval Europe's most terrifying torture device. But here's the truth. It never existed. No record of it appears in any medieval document. The first Iron Maiden was built in the 1800s as a prop to shock and entertain. It was pieced together from old armor and imagination, then sold to museums as a relic of cruelty. The real torture wasn't what it did to people. It was what it did to history. We wanted the past to look barbaric, so we invented a monster. Lie number 12. Vikings never wore horned helmets. Picture a Viking warrior. Horned helmet, battle rage, axe raised high. It's one of the most enduring images in pop culture, but it's totally false. Archaeologists have never found a Viking helmet with horns. Those horns were added in the 19th century by costume designers and romanticized by artists. Real Viking helmets were simple, conical iron or leather, without anything that could snag in battle. The horns sell better. They turned practical war gear into fantasy props, and centuries later, we still believe it. Lie number 13, the invented inventor of baseball. Ask most Americans who invented baseball, and you'll hear the name Abner Doubleday, a Civil War hero who supposedly drew up the rules of the game in a New York field. Except, he never did. That story was made up by a commission in 1907 trying to give baseball a purely American origin. Doubleday never even mentioned the sport in his journals. They just picked a dead war hero and built a legend. America didn't just invent baseball. It invented the myth of who invented it. Lie number 14, General Tso's chicken. Sweet, sticky, and everywhere in America. General Tso's chicken. But if you order it in China, you'll just get confused looks. The dish was invented in New York in the 1970s by a Chinese chef who wanted to please American taste buds. Fry it, coat it in sauce, and give it a name that sounds heroic. Instant success. The real General Tso never tasted it. The legend was born in a wok, not a war. Lie number 15, the Trojan horse. A giant wooden horse rolled through the gates of Troy. Soldiers hidden inside, victory guaranteed. It's one of the most famous war tricks ever told. But historians say it probably never existed. The horse was likely a metaphor, maybe a siege engine, or even an earthquake linked to the horse god Poseidon. Ancient poets turned it into a myth because, let's face it, they knocked the gate down with a log. Doesn't sound nearly as epic. Lie number 16, the 300 Spartans. We've all heard of the 300 Spartans who stood against 1,000,000 Persians. But here's what the movies left out. They weren't alone. Over 7,000 other Greek soldiers fought beside them at Thermopylae. The Spartans were elite, but they weren't the whole army. Over time, storytellers trimmed the numbers, turning a coalition into a legend of 300 heroes. History loves a clean headline, not a crowded battlefield. Lie number 17, the Mozart effect. Parents everywhere once believed that playing Mozart to their babies made them smarter. But that idea came from one small study in 1993 on college students, not infants. The effect only lasted 10 minutes and improved one kind of reasoning. But marketers ran wild with it, selling millions of Baby Genius CDs. The Mozart effect wasn't science. It was the sound of brilliant marketing. Lie number 18, the Perpetual motion machine. In 1812, an inventor named Charles Redheffer claimed he'd built a machine that could run forever. Crowds lined up, paying $1 to see this miracle of physics. But when an engineer investigated, he found the truth. Behind a wall, an old man sat turning a crank by hand. The world's first perpetual motion machine was powered by a tired man and a sandwich. Even genius can't beat the laws of physics. Lie number 19, white marble statues. We picture Greek and Roman statues as pure white marble, elegant and timeless. But the truth? They were painted in bold, bright colors, reds, blues, golds, even neon greens. Over time, the paint faded away and Renaissance artists assumed they'd always been white. The ancients weren't minimalists, they loved color. We just whitewashed history, literally. Lie number 20, the Hollywood cowboy. The cowboy we know, rugged, white, stoic, is a movie invention. In reality, nearly 1 in 4 cowboys in the Old West were black, and many were Mexican vaqueros who taught Americans how to herd cattle. The Wild West was a melting pot, not a Clint Eastwood movie. But Hollywood decided what a real cowboy looked like, and the rest of the world believed it. Lie number 21. Nero played the fiddle while Rome burned. As flames swallowed Rome, Emperor Nero supposedly stood by, playing his fiddle and laughing. But the fiddle didn't even exist yet. It wouldn't for another 1,000 years. Historical records show Nero wasn't even in Rome. He rushed back to organize relief efforts. The story of Nero's fiddle wasn't history. It was political propaganda written by his enemies. Lie number 22. People in the Middle Ages never bathed. We imagine filthy peasants covered in mud, nobles masking stench with perfume. But that's just a myth. Medieval towns had public bathhouses, and soap made from animal fat and ash was common. People didn't shower daily like we do, but they understood cleanliness. The Middle Ages weren't spotless, but they weren't crawling with dirt either. Lie number 23. Everyone died at 30 in the Middle Ages. The average life expectancy was 30. Statistics sounds horrifying, but it's totally misleading. Infant deaths dragged the average down. If you made it past childhood, you could live to 60 or even 70. People weren't dying young, babies were. The Middle Ages were harsh, yes, but they weren't a death sentence at 29. Lie number 24. The Curse of Tutankhamun. When Howard Carter opened King Tut's tomb in 1922, newspapers screamed about a deadly curse. Sponsors died mysteriously. Rumors spread fast. The pharaoh's revenge, they said, but studies later showed the team's death rate was totally normal. Carter himself lived another 17 years. The curse wasn't real, just a brilliant press invention that sold papers faster than gold ever could. History isn't a book of facts, it's a game of whispers. Some stories survived because they were beautiful, not because they were true. But now that you know better, the next time someone repeats a fact from history class, you'll know to ask one simple question. Who wanted me to believe that? If you love unlearning the lies we grew up with, hit subscribe, because the next episode will make you question everything again.